And up until recently, the fourth one was Kristi Noem, the female governor of South Dakota, but she's had a very difficult couple of weeks surrounding a book she released that said she had met Kim Jong Un when she didn't, and admitting that she shot her 14-year-old puppy, which usually doesn't go over well in politics. So there's an open space, let's say, on that fourth spot at the top of the ticket right now.
Right, let's turn our attention then to New York as Donald Trump's former fixer turned witness for Stormy Daniels, Michael Cohen, will take the stand in the cross-examination later this afternoon. Already, he's told the court the former president told him to handle hush money payments and instructed him to sort it all out. The hush money trial will be the scene of high drama and high jeopardy this afternoon for Donald Trump. So who better to speak to than Mick Mulvaney, the former chief of staff to Donald Trump in the White House? Welcome to the show, Mick.
Hello, and thanks for having me.
Mick, you're clearly not going to be vice president. Otherwise, you'd be down at the courtroom talking on behalf of Donald Trump, which is apparently the thing to do these days.
Yeah, it's been a regular sort of parade of vice president wannabes and other Republicans. It's sort of become Mar-a-Lago North. It used to be you go to Palm Beach to see the president. Now you go to the courtroom in New York. I think half a dozen of them were there yesterday. Look, some of it's understandable. I mean, he's the leader of the party, the de facto leader of the party at least, and you want to go to show support for the leader, especially if many of us, if you think it's a politically motivated sort of witch hunt, then you go down. That being said, I was a little surprised that the sitting Speaker of the House went down to the court yesterday. The Speaker of the House doesn't need to go down there to find a microphone. He can walk out the front door of his office here in Washington, D.C., and there'll be 100 cameras focusing at him. So some of it's a little bit overkill, but that's politics in the U.S. right now.
It's like a medieval court, isn't it? You go and pay homage to the king.
To a certain extent, there's a lot of folks who want to, get their face on television. I don't think it's a uniquely American Republican thing to have politicians beat a steady path to a camera that's got a red light on.
Tell us how you think it's all going. Take a step back from it all, because we tend to get mired in the detail, and we'll talk about Michael Cohen in a minute. But in terms of just how the trial is panning out, what it's doing to the polls, what it's doing to Trump's image, I'd love your take on it.
Actually, I don't think we're getting mired in the details. I think we're sort of getting mired in the macro, in the very sensational, the stories about sex with a porn star, or alleged sex relationships with a porn star, about fixers, to use the terminology used to introduce Michael Cohen. It's all very sensational and all very sort of salacious. The case is really about bookkeeping. The charge is that Donald Trump took a business expense for the payment to Stormy Daniels in order to cover up a campaign expense, which I guess if you interpret it the way the DA does in New York City is a felony under New York state law. That's sort of been lost in all of this, and it's become sort of the made-for-television afternoon special that it has been. Is it moving the polls? Not much. It helped Donald Trump considerably early on when the charges were first brought. In fact, there were actually Democrats who defended Donald Trump against these charges when they were first brought about a year ago. The other charges against him are very, very serious. The charges regarding January 6th, the charges regarding the election interference in Georgia are serious charges. This is probably the least serious of the criminal charges. And the fact that this one was brought first and then is being pursued first has actually helped the president in the past. That said, those numbers are probably already cooked into the polling, and we've not seen much movement one way or the other for or against Donald Trump since the trial has started.
I agree, and I think there's something. I mean, look, I would never let cards on the table. I would never vote for Donald Trump if I'm a US citizen, but I would never. I can't work out how to get registered to vote. But there is something extraordinarily compelling about him. He is kind of, compared to the kind of two-dimensional politicians one have, when you speak, you can't help but be kind of mesmerized, a bit like our Boris Johnson.
Well, all politicians, certainly. You don't rise to this level in any major government if you don't have a little bit of charisma. I mean, even Joe Biden, back before was a younger man, was well known for some of his personal sort of attributes that people just really liked. And Donald Trump is the same. Face it, these are two of the most well-known politicians in the world, certainly in this country, and most folks have made up their mind one way or the other about Donald Trump and Joe Biden. They're not going to hear anything in this trial that probably will surprise them. If you didn't like him going into the trial, you're going to like him a lot less. And if you thought he was okay going to the trial, you're probably going to like him at least the same, if not better. So again, I don't think it moves the needle. It makes for some compelling media here in the country. It's certainly getting a lot of attention. For example, got more attention yesterday than the inflation numbers in the perverse world that we live in. But again, I don't think America's got a sort of a control over that.
Mick, you were Donald Trump's chief of staff. You're also his Northern Ireland envoy, which I know is a passion of yours. But you also know a lot of people in Congress. What is your, if you were sitting here now with Trump chewing the fat, who would you suggest he pick as his vice president nominee?
Yeah, I've actually even had a good bit of thought. Tim Scott's a good friend of mine. I think Tim would make a
Remind our listeners who Tim Scott is.
Sorry, that's correct. Tim Scott is the African-American Republican senator from my home state of South Carolina. He's on the short list. The short list includes 2 African-American men and 2 white women. The African-American men would be Tim Scott, a senator from the state of South Carolina, and Ben Carson, former doctor, former candidate for president who served as President Trump's Secretary of Housing and Urban Development in his first cabinet. And then 2 women. One is Elise Stefanik, a young woman from suburban New York, a Republican member of Congress. And up until recently, the 4th one was Kristi Noem, the female governor of South Dakota. But she's had a very difficult couple of weeks surrounding a book she released that said she had met Kim Jong Un when she didn't, and admitting that she shot her 14-year-old puppy, which usually doesn't go over well in politics. So there's an open space, let's say, on that 4th spot at the top of the ticket right now.
Tell me about this woman from New York. It's a name I've never heard before.
Elise Stefanik made a great name for herself here recently. She was the one in charge of the investigations into the large premier Ivy League schools here in the United States in the Northeast on how they dealt with the early days of anti-Semitism after the October 7th attacks in Israel. And she was the one who got these folks to essentially not be able to say that anti-Semitism broke the rules of conduct at Harvard and at MIT and at the University of Pennsylvania.
Yes. That was sensational stuff.
It really was. It was the very first congressional hearing in history to have more than 1 billion views. And Elise Stefanik, the member of Congress, is already a member of the House Republican leadership, so she's well known in Washington, D.C., but that propelled her not only to national but international sort of acclaim, which Donald Trump loves.
Brilliant. Well, Mick Mulvaney, given your extensive knowledge of American politics, it's always wonderful to have you on the show and to hear your insights. And you've got a new name. If you're like me, you've got a new name there to bat about. In fact, I would say 2 or 3 new names who are the likely vice presidential candidates for the presidential bid by Donald Trump. And it's going to be important because obviously Donald Trump is doing well in the polls and there's every likelihood he could become the next president. Mick Mulvaney, thank you so much for coming on the show.